So, I want you to imagine trying to drink, like, thick molasses through a tiny little coffee stirrer.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that sounds completely miserable.
Right. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating. Your cheeks start to ache. You're, pulling with all your might, and you are getting maybe a single drop.
Yeah, barely anything.
Exactly. So now I want you to take that image, shrink it down to a microscopic level, and just imagine forcing that exact same thick molasses
Hmm.
through a tiny metal tube directly into human tissue.
The sheer mechanical stress of that is, I mean, it's honestly hard to wrap your head around.
It is, and that is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We're looking at a very specific, but entirely relatable medical puzzle. Why do some of these cosmetic and medical injections just hurt so much?
And more importantly, how a really simple adjustment changes everything.
Yes. How warming a syringe of thick injectables, we're focusing on polynucleotides today, to exactly 37 degrees Celsius, magically transforms the experience for you.
It takes it from this grueling ordeal into something almost seamless.
Totally. And to get there, we are pulling from a really cool stack of sources today. We've got complex fluid dynamics equations, human pain models, clinical trials on injection speeds, and even these deep rheological studies on the actual structural integrity of DNA.
Yeah, it's a great lineup. And, the thing people often miss when they sit in that clinic chair is that they aren't just passively getting a treatment.
Right. There's a lot going on under the surface.
Exactly.
Oh.
Your tissue is essentially the endpoint of a massive physical and biological collision. I mean, we are trying to shove a highly viscous, really stubborn gel into a sealed, delicate biological space.
Like a literal battle against physics.
It is physics on one side and then the body's highly evolved chemical hazard sensors on the other.
Which is wild.
Mm.
And, to figure out how to win that battle, you first have to understand the physical struggle of just getting the fluid out of the syringe to begin with.
Right, you can't just casually press the plunger and expect it to glide.
No, not at all. I was looking through the Hagen-Poiseuille equation we have in the research today, which is basically the foundational math for how fluids behave inside a cylinder.
Yeah, it is the governing law of fluid dynamics for this exact scenario.
And the part that completely blew my mind was the fourth power rule. Let me see if I can explain this in plain English, because it completely changed how I view needles.
Go for it.
So if a doctor wants to make an injection less painful for you, their natural instinct is we'll use a smaller needle, right?
Makes sense intuitively.
Right.
Yeah.
They drop from a standard 20-gauge needle down to this tiny, hair-thin 30-gauge needle. But the math says the flow rate is inversely proportional to the fourth power of the needle's radius.
Which is where things get really difficult.
Exactly. Meaning, if you cut the needle's opening in half, it doesn't just become, twice as hard to push the plunger. You have to calculate 2 to the power of 4.
Yep. It becomes 16 times harder.
16 times harder.
Yeah.
To push the exact same fluid through that space.
It creates an exponential wall of resistance. When you shrink the tube to that degree, the friction against the inner walls of the needle just dominates the entire process.
And we aren't even injecting water here, which makes it worse.
Right. We are dealing with soft tissue fillers and polynucleotides, and these are heavily engineered for very specific rheological properties. You mentioned viscosity, which is a fluid's resistance to flow.
Like the molasses.
Exactly like the molasses. But we also have to measure elasticity, or what rheologists refer to as G prime.
Okay, let's pause there and define G prime so we aren't just throwing around laboratory jargon. What does that actually look like inside the syringe?
So think of G prime as the structural memory, or the firmness of the gel. It basically measures how much energy the fluid stores when you deform it and how aggressively it wants to bounce back to its original shape.
Oh, interesting. So it wants to stay rigid.
Exactly. If you have a filler with a very high G prime, it acts almost like a solid when it's just resting there. Which is fantastic for clinical results because, it lifts cheekbones and structurally supports the skin.
But I'm guessing it's an absolute nightmare to force through a microscopic needle.
An absolute nightmare.
The numbers in the studies really put this into perspective, actually. We measure this thickness in centipoise. So water sits at a baseline viscosity of about 1 centipoise.
Right, very thin.
Yeah. But molasses is around 8,500. Sour cream is roughly 15,000. And some of these aesthetic fillers are completely off the charts. Like bilateral balance is close to 10,000, but something heavy like Radies is over 340,000 centifois,
You are practically trying to inject wet concrete through a strand of hair at that point.
which introduces a huge problem, right? The human
Yeah. Oh,
limitation,
yes.
the clinician's thumb.
Yes, and researchers actually put this physical limitation to the test. They hooked up syringes to these really highly sensitive force sensors to see exactly how much mechanical power a human hand can generate before the muscles just fail.
Wow, what did they find?
Well, a typical male practitioner can exert just under 100 newtons of force. Females max out around 65 newtons.
So if a practitioner is doing these procedures all day, just pushing against that exponential fourth power wall of friction, their hand is eventually going to give out.
Yeah, they hit total thumb fatigue. And when small muscles fatigue, they lose their smooth motor control. The thumb begins to tremble.
That sounds dangerous for an injection.
It can be. Often the injector will accidentally compensate for that fatigue by just bearing down with a sudden, jerky push just to get the plunger moving.
Oh, like they just shove it.
Exactly. And the internal pressure inside the syringe skyrockets so rapidly that the needle can literally pop off the hub. You end up spraying expensive product across the room.
Or worse, right? They successfully force it through, but it blasts out the other side in this uncontrolled, high-pressure burst under your skin.
Right, which we'll get into the consequences of in a second. But
Okay.
first, there's another variable here. Not all needles are manufactured equally.
Oh, right. I found a study in our STAG analyzing the manufacturing tolerances of these tools. A 30-gauge needle from one brand might have a vastly different internal diameter than a 30-gauge from a competitor.
Even though the box says they're the exact same size.
Exactly. The external diameter of the needle is standardized, sure, but the internal wall thickness of the metal is totally unregulated.
So imagine a clinic switches to a cheaper needle brand to save some money. The doctor goes to inject a patient thinking they are using their standard tools, but the inside of that new needle is just a microscopic fraction of a millimeter tighter.
And because of that fourth power rule.
That invisible difference suddenly demands like 40% more thumb pressure. They are caught completely off guard.
So the poor clinician is basically arm wrestling physics just to get the product out. But let's flip the perspective to the listener, the person actually sitting in the chair.
The one receiving the injection.
Right. Let's say the doctor forces the plunger down. They get that thumb fatigue, and a sudden high-pressure burst of this thick polynucleotide gel shoots in your face. What is that wave of fluid actually doing to the tissue on a microscopic level?
Well, it triggers what we classify as mechanical pain. Human skin isn't just an empty, hollow sac waiting to be filled up like a balloon.
Right, it's got structure.
It is a densely woven, complex architecture of collagen, elastin fibers, tightly packed cells. When a thick bolus of fluid bursts in uncontrollably like that, it rapidly distends that architecture.
You are physically tearing the subcutaneous space open.
You are. And that violent stretching instantly activates your mechanical nociceptors. These are nerve endings specifically calibrated to detect physical tissue damage.
Which perfectly explains that sharp tearing sensation people feel. But I've noticed something else. Even when a doctor goes incredibly slow and completely avoids those sudden bursts, some fluids just burn the second they enter the body.
Like a chemical burn.
Yeah, it feels like liquid fire spreading under the skin. Why is a supposedly safe medical fluid causing a burning sensation?
That is a distinct parallel mechanism. We call it chemical pain. The body possesses this biological alarm system made up of transient receptor potential channels, TRP channels for short.
Right, we've got TRPA1 and TRPV1 in the sources.
Exactly. Those are the major players. These are specialized hazard sensors located on your sensory nerve endings, and they are specifically designed to detect noxious, dangerous chemicals in the environment.
Like the sources mentioned wasabi. If you've ever eaten a large amount of wasabi and felt that intense, sharp burning in your sinuses,
You have experienced a direct TRPA1 reaction.
and it turns out some injectables are accidentally setting off the wasabi alarm in our skin. There is this incredible trial in the research today on etomidate, which is a common intravenous anesthetic.
Right. You would naturally assume an anesthetic numbs you as it goes in.
Right. But patients getting etomidate frequently complain of a severe, agonizing burn spreading up their arm during the injection. Why would an anesthetic burn?
Researchers were puzzled by this too, so they isolated the variables, and they discovered the pain wasn't coming from the anesthetic drug itself.
It was the solubilizer.
Yes, a chemical called propylene glycol, which manufacturers use simply to keep the drug dissolved in a liquid form.
And that propylene glycol happens to directly bind to those TRPA1 hazard channels.
Exactly. It activates them and initiates a massive cascade of localized neurogenic inflammation.
It's literally tricking the body into believing it is under chemical attack so the nerves flare up in defense. That is wild.
The composition of the fluid itself is ringing the alarm bells.
Okay, so we've got mechanical tearing, we've got chemical fires. I want to add one more layer to this misery, though: temperature.
Yes, the cold factor.
Right. So if I jump into a freezing cold lake, my body's immediate survival reaction is to shrink. My skin tightens, my pores close, my muscles contract. What actually happens if you take a room temperature fluid sitting in a clinic cabinet at, say, 20 degrees Celsius and inject it deep into my internal tissue, which is resting at a balmy 37 degrees?
Well, your internal tissue reacts the exact same way you do when you hit that cold lake water. It is a localized, evolutionary survival mechanism.
So it shrinks.
Exactly. When that relatively cold 20-degree fluid hits the 37-degree tissue, the local blood vessels and cellular structures undergo immediate vasoconstriction to preserve core body heat. Everything just clamps down.
Which sounds like the absolute worst possible biological response when you are actively trying to inject a thick gel. I mean, the space you're trying to fill is actively shrinking away from you.
It creates a devastating feedback loop for the patient. The tissue constricts, meaning the injector now has to use even more physical force to push the fluid into a smaller space,
Which causes more mechanical tearing.
which triggers more pain signals sent to the brain. The cold fluid takes a tight space and turns it into a completely unyielding one.
Wow. All right, so we have a very clear picture of the problem here. We can't widen the needle because a massive needle causes unnecessary physical trauma, bruising, all that. And we can't water down the polynucleotide gel because then it loses its clinical effectiveness and that structural support we want. The fluid is thick, the tube is tiny, and the tissue is hostile.
But we can manipulate the temperature.
Yes. If cold causes all these cascading failures, what happens if a clinician takes a polynucleotide syringe and places it in a medical incubator, heating it to exactly 37 degrees Celsius before they inject it?
You effectively short-circuit both the physical and the biological pain mechanisms simultaneously.
Okay, break that down for me. Start with the physics.
From a pure physics standpoint, heating a viscous gel like a polynucleotide increases the kinetic energy of its molecules. The molecules vibrate faster and they move apart just a tiny fraction of a millimeter.
So it loosens up.
Exactly. This temporary expansion breaks some of the internal friction holding the dense gel together.
Meaning the dynamic viscosity drops, the fluid actually becomes softer and more pliable.
And if we loop back to that Hagen-Poiseuille equation.
Oh, the fourth power rule.
Right. We know that even a marginal drop in a fluid's viscosity has a massive compounding impact on the flow rate. The syringe suddenly glides.
So the clinician doesn't have to strain, which entirely eliminates the thumb fatigue.
Exactly. And that allows them to deliver the fluid in a smooth, steady, highly controlled manner, completely removing those sudden, jerky bursts that cause the mechanical tissue tearing.
Okay, so warming solves the injector's mechanical struggle against friction. Awesome. But what does it actually do for my biology?
It completely erases the temperature gradient. Think about it. If you inject a 37-degree fluid into 37-degree tissue, the body does not register a thermal intrusion.
There's no cold shock.
None. Therefore, there's no localized vasoconstriction. The surrounding blood vessels remain wide open and relaxed.
The tissue remains compliant.
Exactly, meaning it can physically stretch and accommodate the new fluid volume smoothly and naturally without ringing any of those biological alarm bells.
I do have to push back on this, though, just for the sake of anyone listening who actually knows what a polynucleotide is.
Sure, what's the concern?
Well, we are talking about injecting long, complex chains of DNA. If I take a syringe filled with DNA and stick it in a medical warmer, aren't I going to cook it?
That's a common worry, actually.
Yeah, I feel like heating delicate biological molecules is a great way to just destroy their structural integrity before the drug ever reaches the patient's skin.
It is a very valid concern, and it's one that requires us to look at the deep rheological studies on the properties of calf thymus DNA, which is often used in these tests.
Okay.
It turns out DNA is a remarkably robust molecule. The researchers tested the exact thermal limits of its structural integrity, and the double helical conformation, that tightly wound ladder structure that gives DNA its therapeutic properties, it remains perfectly stable all the way up to 55 degrees Celsius.
Oh, wow. So 37 degrees is essentially room temperature for DNA. Doesn't even come close to the danger zone.
It doesn't even begin to stress the molecular bonds. The actual melting point, the temperature where those double strands finally denature and split apart, that doesn't happen until around 70 degrees
That's
Celsius.
huge.
Yeah, so warming a syringe to human body temperature is entirely safe. You preserve 100% of the therapeutic and structural properties of the polynucleotide while unlocking all the fluid dynamics and pain-relieving benefits.
That is wild to think about. It makes me wonder, though almost every time I go to a clinic, they try to manage pain by slapping a frozen ice pack on my skin for a few minutes before the shot.
Ah, yes, the ice pack method.
Why are clinics icing the skin if warming the fluid is the actual biological cure?
Because surface temperature and internal fluid temperature are two entirely different physiological events, and they are unfortunately often conflated in clinical practice.
Interesting.
The research points to a highly controlled clinical trial studying the subcutaneous injection of a drug called istecanumab. The researchers wanted to see if altering the surface temperature of the skin beforehand genuinely changed the pain scores.
So they iced the skin.
They rigorously tested both ice packs and heat packs, applying them directly to the patient's skin before injecting.
Let me guess. It did absolutely nothing.
It didn't reliably alter the pain at all. Numbing the very top layer of the epidermis just does not help when the pain is being generated millimeters below the surface as the tissue matrix is violently stretched from the inside.
That makes total sense.
But in separate, massive trials looking at lidocaine injections, they found that warming the injectate itself to body temperature produced a profound, statistically significant reduction in patient pain.
Because the trauma isn't happening on the surface of your skin, it's happening deep inside the tissue as it's forced to physically expand.
Exactly.
So the ice pack is just a placebo band-aid, but optimizing the fluid is actually fixing the root mechanics of the pain.
I love that. So, we have the fluid perfectly warmed, viscosity is down, the mechanical tearing is minimized, and the cold shock vasoconstriction is gone.
All solved.
But you are still physically putting a metal needle into someone's face.
You are! And the literature points to one more piece of the puzzle to mitigate that last bit of pain, right? Delivery technique. How do we take advantage of the human nervous system to erase whatever tiny fraction of discomfort is left?
We turn to neurology, specifically the gate control theory of pain.
I love this theory.
It's fascinating. The spinal cord contains a neurological gate that basically either blocks pain signals or lets them pass through to the brain.
I've always thought of this like a traffic jam on a 4-lane highway.
Yeah.
Your sensory nerves can only transmit so much data at one time.
That's a great way to picture it.
Right. So if you brutally stub your toe, what do you immediately do? You grab it, you rub it. You are sending heavy pressure and vibration signals up those exact same neural pathways.
And those pressure signals are physically larger, and they travel faster than the slower-moving pain signals.
They literally beat the pain to the spinal cord.
Exactly. So if a clinician applies a buzzing vibration device or just firm pressure right next to the injection site, they are flooding those neural pathways with non-noxious stimuli.
It closes the gate.
It closes the gate. The brain focuses entirely on the buzzing vibration, and the actual sharp pain of the needle is severely muted, if not entirely blocked from registering.
It is a biological hack of our own wiring.
It really is.
But even if you hack the nervous system, you still have to control the speed of the injection, right? We talked about thumb fatigue causing sudden bursts. What is the actual scientifically proven sweet spot for pushing this fluid in?
The literature establishes that 1 milliliter per minute is the optimal threshold.
1 milliliter a minute. That is incredibly slow.
It is, but at that specific rate, the biological matrix of the tissue has enough time to slowly separate, stretch, and accommodate the new volume without crossing the threshold that violently triggers those mechanical nociceptors.
Which sounds completely impossible for a human hand to manually execute. I mean, holding perfectly steady for a full 60 seconds just to push 1 single milliliter of thick gel?
Oh, it's very difficult. And this is exactly where human biology hands the baton over to modern engineering. We are seeing a huge rise in motorized pen-style syringes and automatic pressure detection devices.
Oh, like robotics.
Basically, yeah. These tools have internal microsensors that monitor tissue resistance in real time. If the tissue is dense, the motor senses the pushback and slows down automatically.
Wow.
It adjusts to maintain that perfect delivery rate, removing human error and thumb fatigue from the equation entirely.
The precision of that is just incredible. So let's step back and look at the whole picture here. We started with the incredibly frustrating image of forcing thick molasses through a tiny coffee stirrer.
A painful image.
Truly. But by applying the physics and biology we've unpacked today specifically, by pre-warming a polynucleotide injection to exactly 37 degrees Celsius, the entire paradigm shifts.
It changes everything.
We satisfy the Hagen-Poiseuille laws of fluid dynamics, softening the gel so the syringe glides effortlessly. We bypass the body's cold shock survival response, keeping the tissue wide open and relaxed. We rely on the thermal stability of DNA to ensure the drug stays perfectly intact, and then we layer on neurological traffic jams and robotic precision to make the actual delivery nearly painless.
It's an elegant solution, and yet science is always pushing further.
Oh, what's next?
Well, while temperature manipulation is the current gold standard, the rheological studies point to something even more provocative for the future. DNA has what we call a semi-rigid character, and under certain high-stress conditions, it can exhibit non-Newtonian behaviors.
Non-Newtonian, meaning it breaks the normal rules of liquids.
Right.
Wait, like oobleck.
Yes.
That cornstarch and water mixture kids play with, where if you punch it, it turns rock hard, but if you hold it gently, it drips right through your fingers.
The exact same principle, but reversed. Imagine the next evolution of aesthetic injectables. We might engineer fluids that are designed to temporarily uncoil their molecular structure purely from the intense physical shear stress of being squeezed through a needle.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
while it's inside the needle, under immense pressure?
It would flow easily, almost like water. But the microsecond it exits the needle tip and that shear stress drops, it instantly snaps back into a firm, highly viscous, supportive gel.
We have mastered manipulating temperature. Manipulating molecular shear stress is the next great frontier. A
Exactly.
gel that literally shapeshifts into water just to get through the needle, then instantly rebuilds itself inside your face. That is wild. Well, next time you find yourself sitting in a clinic chair looking at a needle, take a moment to appreciate the absolute marvel of physics, biology, and thermodynamics happening just beneath your skin. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Catch you next time.